All right, we're starting out this morning. We're working on some fencing. We're over here at our junk pile. So every good homestead should have a junk pile. What we have here is some old power poles. You can see we've got some old tin from a barn, some old fence posts that we have. So I was able to use these get these poles from the power service that we have here locally. They were replacing some poles. I asked nice, they just dropped these where they were. So I came by and cut them up and brought them home. So I think it's important for your fence. The most important things to me are our gate post and our corner post. So I like to use these poles. These weren't actually bad. They were just needing to move the pole. So these are completely serviceable, so they're still in good shape. So I picked out one that we're gonna use for our corner post here. So we're gonna show you guys how to build some fence. All right, we're here on this side of the fence today. What we're showing is we already have this H-brace done, and what we did when we had the property surveyed, they put in T-post. So if you get the property surveyed, I had two options. I could have metal T-post or I could have wooden stakes. Well, I had it surveyed the property about 4 years ago, so I'm glad I went with the metal T-post instead of the stakes, so they were still here. So what we did is I put a fence post right in place where the survey stake was, so I knew exactly where the line was, and down further, we had another stake in place. So again, I put the fence post there right where that survey marker was. So we're right on the line, and to me that works out for you. If you want spacing off of the line, you know, that's up to you. But our fence is going right on the line, so I put this gate post on where the T-post was, the other one where the T-post was, and I ran a wire between so I could figure out where this H-brace needed to be. So what we did to construct this, we put this gate post in. I used the material we had to figure out the spacing, so I just laid it on the ground, ran it in line with the wire that I ran, dug the hole, and the purpose of this H-brace is when all the tension now is going to be pulled this way. So the H-brace runs into this post, and then this diagonal piece kind of locks it all together. So the H doesn't move, it holds it all tight. The positioning of the H is important. So the way that I had learned it, the H goes between your top two wires. So I can see, you can't see it, but I can. We're gonna have a wire here and a wire here. So you measure into the middle and then put your H brace so it holds everything tight. So now what we're gonna do is I did the same thing on the other side. So we showed our main gate, entrance gate on the earlier video. So I went from that corner post all the way to this post. So I did have to run 650 feet worth of high tensile wire to pull it straight to figure out where our line's gonna be. But to me, that gives you a straight fence and everything looks better. You know you're where you're supposed to be. So I had hung the gate, I ran our wire, and what we have now is the tractor set in place. We're gonna dig for our other side of the gate here and get our H-brace set up. And then we're gonna rerun that wire and mark the rest of the post down this line. All right, so here's one trick I learned after doing all those other holes. Hit the clutch to stop that auger from spinning. Bring it up and then spin it out. So I'll do that one more time. Drop it in, pick it up, then let the clutch out, spin all that dirt out. That way you're not digging it back out by hand. All right, we drilled the hole with the tractor. I came back with the post hole digger, cleaned it up a bit, and wanted to get a little bit deeper than what the auger can get. Since we have a 650-foot run here, and this is going to be the corner post for this run, that it is absolutely critical that we get this down as best we can. So here the frost depth is 32 inches. So we want that at least 32 inches, and we have it dug down almost 4 feet. So really, if you have a long enough post, the deeper the better on these corner posts, so it really holds in the ground, because it's going to take a lot of stress. We are running 7 wires of high tensile, so there's going to be a lot of pull on it, especially for this length. All right, we have our post in the hole, and we have our gate latch. This is a different type of gate latch. It allows a pass through, and it's lockable. So we hung the latch to figure out where our post exactly needed to be, you know, offset from the gate. because you've only got about 1.5 inches to play with. So we wanted to make sure that was right. So we set the latch so we knew where our gate was going to be. On this long of a run, or really on any run on your corner post, you can have a little bit of a backward lean, because even though we're building our H as strong as we can, it can have a little bit of pull to the inside. So you can set the post, the top compared to the bottom, up to 1 inch inside. So you're kind of pre-leaning it, so as you pull it, it straightens it back out. So keeping that in consideration, we have the gauge and the latch pretty tight together. So as you set the post, one of the key things to making sure that this post is sturdy is your tamping. So we have this old piece of pipe with a 90-degree fitting on the bottom that we're tamping with. But one of the things that we want to do is make sure that we don't put too much dirt in the hole at one time, because you're just not going to be able to get the compaction then. So what we're doing is just shovel in a few inches at a time, tamping all the way around, putting in a little bit more, making sure that we're still plumb on our post or lean the way that we want it as we go. So we're putting a little bit of dirt, tamping it, and building it all the way up to the top until we get this hole filled, and this post will be pretty much rock solid. We've tamped in all the dirt, and a lot of the time you're going to end up a little bit short. You know, if you really tamped it in well, you're going to come up a little bit short. So I have some gravel on hand. We have it in a pile. I just scooped it in a bucket. So you might need some extra material on hand. So just keep that in mind as you go through. This thing isn't all the way to the top yet, but it's rock solid, and that's what you're looking for. If for some reason, as you tamp that in, if you've got any significant play in here, especially on the corner post, you're just going to want to dig that back out and start over. What can happen if you don't get good compaction on the very bottom where it's loose, but you get compacted towards the top, the bottom of that post can still wiggle around a little bit, and you're just never really going to fix it. So you're just better off starting over. So make sure you start off well, tamping in, like I said, a little bit at a time, and you're going to end up with a real solid post. We have our corner post set. Now we're setting up our H. So what we're doing is actually just using the material to measure where the next hole is going to be. So you can see I have this orange line on the ground. I marked that originally when we pulled, so you can see this is our 650 feet worth of high tensile wire that we pulled tight. I marked right underneath the wire where the line needs to be. So you can see where we're at. So all I'm just going to do is take my paint and then mark where the corner of that post needs to be. I'm going to bring it back a little bit considering the taper of the post. You know, it's a little bit thinner at the top where we're going to put that. So I'm going to mark it back just a little bit, and then I'm just to remind myself where the hole actually needs to be, and then needs to bump on this side. So we're going to move the tractor, get this drilled, do the exact same thing we did with the first post. Now that we have our second post in place, we're going to go ahead and show the assembly of the H-brace. I did forget to mention, for these posts, for the main corner posts, we were using an old power pole. For these are northern white cedar that have been pressure treated, so I know they're really going to hold up well on the ground. So let's show you through how we set this H-brace up. So as I mentioned before, we're going to put the H between our top two wires. In this case, there's a barbed wire on top, so the top two electrified wires. So on the back side, I have marked where the wires are, and in the middle, I have marked where this will be 5 inches between the two. So what I'm going to do is take this drill bit, and we're going to set one of these 5-inch pins. So I'm going to try getting this as plumb as I can and as straight in line as I can. We are using a drill bit that is the exact size of these pins. So in this case, these are 3/8. So we went down to the hardware store and bought a 3/8 bit, and I have marked where the halfway mark is, so I'm right on the money there. So what we're gonna do, grab our hammer, take this 5-inch pin, and we're gonna knock it in, and it's gonna be set out just like this. So you're gonna see why in a second. So what we're gonna do for our H is we're gonna go into the center of this post, and we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna drill in halfway. So now we have that set. We're also probably still gonna need our hammer. Since we're drilling the same size hole as what we have for the pin, it's gonna be a little bit stiff. So we're gonna grab this post. We're gonna kind of have a feel for it since I'm working and Paul's behind the camera. feel for there. Now, with a little assistance. So we got that in place. I'm gonna take the hammer. I'm gonna knock. You see that that's tight. A little bit more. All right. So based on how we drilled the hole and the taper of the post, it's worked out perfect. So it's kind of dumb luck. So what we want to do is make sure that this post, these are both 5-inch cedar posts. So we want to make sure that there's about even spacing. If one's bigger than the other, we want to make sure that they're even on both sides. And then we want to, with any of these posts, there might be a little bit of an arc or a little bit of a curve. So we do want to set up a strong fence, but we want to also have it, this is close to the house, so we want it visually appealing. So it looks like the arc is up here, so I'm happy with that. So now that we have that set, I'm going to grab my tape measure and make sure that I'm about in the center, which it looks like we're right on the money here as far as that being in the center. So now what we're going to do, we're going to go here, and you saw that I had that 10-inch pin. I'm just going to double check that I'm where I want to be. So we're right in here. Again, we want to be as straight as we can. And with these standard bits, they tend to plug up, so you kind of got to put them in, clear that out. If I had like a 3/8 auger bit, that would be a little bit more ideal. So I'm going to grab my pin real quick because I forgot to mark. So what we're going to end up doing here is drilling through, and we're going to drive this pin so it holds this post up to our fence post here, and we're going to leave a little bit out for our wire. So you can see, you know, we got quite a bit of ways. So the way I'm gauging that is I'm just making sure that I'm not drilling too deep. So I do have a little bit of a mark here, so I can kind of gauge how deep I need to be. All right, so we're right on the money there. So we're gonna line this pin up. I left it a little bit short, so I had a little more resistance. So I'm just gonna send that home. Now this is nice and tight. So now what we're gonna do is set up our diagonal. So it is absolutely key that we make sure for our diagonal wire that's holding this together that we have that oriented properly. So the pull on this fence is going that way. We're going to put the strainers in the middle that's going to pull both corners together. So this fence is going to have the tendency to lean that way. So we want to put the wire starting here at the bottom and then going up. If we set this the other way, it's not going to do us any good. As we pull tension with all of our wires, it's going to compress that because it's not doing its job properly. That wire is just going to be loose. So you have to orient it properly. So that's why we left a little bit of this pin hanging out. So we're going to run our angle wire. Everyone that I've seen staples their bottom wire. I like using the pin because I know this is never going to pull loose or break. So I sacrifice one of our pins. So all I'm going to do is do the same thing. Make sure I'm in line the best I can. We're going to set one of these pins to hold our wire. So now I know that when that wire gets looped around here is underneath, that it's never going to pull through that pin and it's going to stay tight. So in a minute, we're going to show you guys how to do our angled wire and how you set that up. All right, so we're on to the next stage of setting up this H-brace. So a couple of tools that we're going to need. We're going to need our crimper, some kind of tool to cut the wire, and then with that crimper comes these special crimps. So this stuff's available at any of your farm supply places. These I think we got from Tractor Supply or our local fleet farm. So what we're going to do, we're going to loop the wire around. Make sure you get your crimps on there first because you're going to need otherwise you have to back feed them around. So you can see on the back, we're going to have that hooked underneath that pin that we set in place. And then here, all we're going to do is give ourselves enough room here, and we're going to slide these crimps over. So with everything, we always put 2 crimps on. We're gonna slide these back the best that we can. So the reason I'm setting up this way instead of doing on the previous fence that I did, we did a double figure 8, and really that was overkill with the high tensile line. A lot of the times you saw the double figure 8 with older fences, and then they would use, I forget what they call it, it's like a flip stick. So they would have a stick that sat between the double figure 8, and you would angle it down, and then you would spin that to create the tension, and then you would put the stick, and then it would lean up against your H-brace. So with this high tensile wire, there's really no need to set that up. And what that caused us, since we did that double figure 8, is when that wire came across, it had a bigger bit of a loop. So with all of our electric lines, well, not all of them, with some of them, they ended up bumping into that figure 8. So with this, we're gonna pull this a little bit tighter. So we really want this fence down the middle. So that way when we nail on our electric lines, they're not gonna bump into the support wire here. So then we're not causing any kind of grounding. Or what that can do, if it's not insulated, it'll make this electrified, which grounds out here, which can cause issues with your fence grounding and not having the power. Or I have seen it to where you have metal latches like this, where it's putting some of the electricity into the pole, which will also electrify your latch, which is connected to your gate. And so you go to let your gate loose, and then you got a little bit of a shock when you go to let the gate loose. So to bypass any of those issues, we're doing the single line, pull it tight, and then we're not going to have any of the problems that we have. So we're just going to crimp these real quick and then show you how to set the strainer up. So the other thing I'm going to mention, if you are running fence and you have like short pieces left over, of your wire, you have a big run and you have a little bit, I like hanging on to those pieces. So here we had a piece that was like 20 foot left over, and I know I can always use those for these support wires and other small uses around the property here. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna take this wire, we're gonna mock up about where we're gonna be at for our crimp. We want to leave a little bit of slack in the middle because we're gonna fold over a piece to put on our strainer, and then we need a little bit to get started. So in my opinion, when we have a piece like this that's 20 or so feet long and we're using maybe 12, I'd rather have it a little bit long than have run a little bit short. Set our crimps in place. So we can slide those down, loop that wire over, and we're doing the exact same thing. You can see I need to make sure that I am above that pin. So now you can really see the purpose of that pin, that now that this wire is at an angle, that this wire will never drop below this pin, especially as we pull it tight. It's really not going to go anywhere, but as you pull it tight, it might have the tendency to go down, and this pin's going to make sure that that never happens. So again, we're going to want to pull these not absolutely as tight as you possibly can, but we want it pretty tight. Again, we want to have this wire pull to the inside the best that we can. So that looks pretty even with the other side. So I'm going to go through again and make sure you're using the crimp tool onto the correct setting. The first time I ever used the crimper, I didn't realize, well, one, that the crimps were marked with the size, and two, that the crimper was marked with the appropriate size for the crimps. So I was actually using the wrong setting, which it did crimp these crimps to some degree. But as I started pulling tension, the crimps were moving. I didn't know what the heck was going on. And then I realized that I crimped the wire wrong. So you'll see on the tool that it's marked here for the 2-3, and that's for the matching for the wire and the crimps that we have. So make sure you're on the right setting. And also over time, these tools can become, I think, basically wore in. So with the manual, it shows how to tension these up, and it comes with a go, no-go gauge on how these crimps are supposed to be crimped. So you actually put that little gauge over top of the crimp to make sure that they're crimped properly. So you might want to check your tools over time to make sure you're getting the proper crimp. All right, so now that we have this set up, we're going to come to the middle. Again, I left myself plenty of slack, so I'm just kind of visually estimating the center, which I think is about here. So we're going to go ahead and cut this wire. So now we're going to set up for our strainer. So the way that I do this to try to keep them even, I'm using my hand as a measuring tool. So I'm here, well, I'll show it this way. And where my thumb is I'm going to start that bend. So we're going to lay our crimps on again. And I like using these strainers. They have the little bail here that keeps this tight. I haven't really messed with any other style, but this really pulls in a lot of wire in case you want to leave slack in the line for some reason. Or I like making sure there's a couple loops on there that I know that the wire is secured in there properly. So once it gets tension, you know, it's kind of like a ratcheting strap. So anyways, we'll get this going here. I'm trying to use the bend in the wire where it naturally is. I kind of want this on the top side. So again, we're going to bend this over, set our 2 crimps in place. I end up using this tool half the time where the other handle is into my body in some way, so I can put two hands on the one handle. To me, it's just a little bit easier. You could also leverage it off the ground, you know, using one hand on each handle. It's a pretty tough tool to use, you know, when it's adjusted properly. All right, so now we have the strainer in place and we have our other wire. And again, like I said, I'd rather have this a little bit long than not. So this is a little bit more than I want to pull in. So I'm going to cut off these 6 or so inches, and I'm willing to sacrifice that, because if you think about it the other way, if you were to cut it too short, instead of wasting 6 inches there and it's too short and I couldn't connect it, well, now you just wasted like 12 feet worth of wire. So I cut it a little bit long, just so I don't have that problem. So in these strainers, they have little holes in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to set that in place, and you intuitively you're going to know, like, you can't do it the opposite way. So we're going to hold this bail and the tensioner in one hand, put the wire through, and we're just going to get that started. So we're going to bend that up. So I just do this a few times to make sure that gets started properly and put a little bit of tension into the wire. And then I'm going to go ahead and use the tool. So I'm going to do this just so I can't do it anymore. So now you can see where we're going here, that this is going to pull tight. So we had this tool, I think, again, this came from Tractor Supply. So the main function of this tool, unlike the first time that I used it, is this little crossbar is what's actually doing the work. On the side here, you can see it's flat. You can use a crescent wrench. So I thought the job was really on the side here, kind of like a spanner wrench that was wrenching it. Well, that's not the function of this tool. That just kind of guides it in place. So as you can see here, that bar sits over top here, and that's what's giving you the leverage to spin this and tighten it up. So you're just going to go along and use that tool and just move it until it's tight. So we're just going to check. We want to make sure that we're still in place on our pins. And with this, the wire was shifted over a little bit. So before we get too much tension on it, we want to make sure that our wire is in the center of our post on both sides. So we could just do a little adjustment here. Yeah, now we're looking good. So because we're going to be running so many lines of high tensile wire, that we want this thing pretty much guitar string tight. I mean, you don't have to put a cheater bar on this or anything, but want to make sure that's tight just like that. So this is really going to strengthen up and hold this H-brace together, and it's really going to make for a strong fence in the end. There's a completion of this H-brace, so it is quite a bit of work, you know, getting all your stuff set up and getting them in the ground properly, tamping them. But if you do take the time now to do it properly, it's really going to save you in the long run. So we want to make sure, you know, this is going to be a 15-year investment on doing this fencing. You know, we want to hopefully have it last that long. So do it right the first time. So we have this H-brace all set up. We have our wire, as I mentioned before, to the other gate post, run all the way down to the corner. So what we're going to do is go to the other side. We have it looped around with a come along. So we'll pull some tension on that to that way it butts up against this post and the other corner post, gets us a perfectly straight line. Then we'll go down and we're going to put posts every 25 feet. So what we'll do, this will run our line. There is some dips and undulation in here. So what we're doing, we're pulling this as tight as we can, and to make sure that we're straight, we're actually going to use a plumb bob. We'll hang that onto the line, drop it down to mark our line so we know that everything's perfectly straight. So by doing that, it's really going to give you a good looking fence. And also when you're using the insulators in the high tensile fence like this, anytime you have a dip or if it goes out or in like that, it can cause tension to pull the nails out for your insulators, which is a problem. And if it bumps out, you're causing stress on that post, and what you're doing is causing more friction, so you have a harder time straining the fence. So having it straight just works out better visually and everything too. So we're going to run our lines every 25 feet, go with the tractor, knock these holes out today. So this will be the end of the video. This is how to do a proper H-brace and set up for your straight fence. So if you guys like the video and the content, please hit the subscribe button, like the video, share it out, and we'll catch you guys on the next video.